They thought the wife was powerless. No money, no allies, no voice in the room. In that courtroom, her husband sat back with a smug smile. Expensive suit, elite lawyers, judges nodding along, already convinced this divorce would be quick and humiliating for her. He laughed when she spoke, mocked her silence, called her nothing in front of strangers. What no one noticed was the way she never argued back, never begged, never reacted, because this wasn't weakness, this was patience. And while everyone in that room believed she was about to lose everything, the people who truly owned the truth were already on their way. By the time they walked through those courtroom doors, the trial would stop being about divorce and start becoming about destruction. Stay with me, because the moment power shifts, it doesn't just break him, it exposes him. Everyone in that courtroom had already made up their mind. They saw a confident, well-dressed man sitting calmly beside his lawyers, a man with power, money, and connections. And across from him, a quiet woman. No designer clothes, no loud voice, no army of attorneys. To them, she looked defeated. They whispered things like, "She's going to lose everything. She should have settled. She never stood a chance." What no one realized, not the judge, not the lawyers, not even her own husband, was that this divorce trial wasn't starting today. It had started years ago, the moment he decided she was powerless. The insults, the cheating, the financial control, the way he laughed when she spoke, like her words didn't matter. He thought this courtroom was where he would finish her. But in reality, this was the room where every lie he built his life on would be tested, one by one, in front of everyone who once believed him. And the most dangerous thing in that room wasn't the judge, wasn't the lawyers. It was the woman he thought would never fight back. Everyone in that courtroom had already decided how this story would end. She sat alone at the defense table, straight-backed, silent, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were pale. No designer lawyer, no flashy entourage, no powerful family sitting behind her. Just whispers, low, sharp, judgmental. People didn't even try to hide it. She's done. He's about to destroy her. Another weak wife thinking love would save her. Across the room, he looked relaxed, too relaxed. Expensive suit, confident posture. One arm draped casually over the chair like the courtroom belonged to him. He leaned over to his attorney and smirked. Not nervous, not worried. Amused, like this trial was just a formality, like she was already erased. When the judge called the case, he didn't even look at her at first. He stared at the ceiling, adjusted his cufflinks, and whispered loud enough for people nearby to hear, "Let's get this over with." That's when she finally lifted her eyes, not angry, not pleading, just steady. And that bothered him, because this wasn't a woman begging for mercy. This was a woman watching. The judge asked for opening statements. His lawyer stood first, confident, polished, almost smug. "She has nothing," he said smoothly. "No assets, no leverage, no witnesses that matter." Then, without even asking permission, he turned slightly toward her and added, "This case is about a woman who thought marriage gave her power, and learned it didn't." A few quiet chuckles echoed in the gallery. He smiled. She didn't react. Not when her name was reduced to a line on paper. Not when her years of sacrifice were dismissed as irrelevant. Not even when he leaned back and whispered again, "You should have known your place." What no one noticed, not the judge, not the lawyers, not even him, was the way her fingers loosened. Slowly, deliberately, as if she'd been. By the second week of the divorce trial, it was already clear who the courtroom favored. Not justice, not truth, power. And power in that room sat comfortably beside him. He arrived every day in tailored suits, flanked by high-priced lawyers who smiled like they already owned the verdict. They laughed quietly while papers were shuffled. They whispered jokes while the judge adjusted his glasses. And then, there was her. She walked in alone. No entourage, no designer labels, no confidence left to borrow. She wore the same modest coat she'd worn for years, not because she wanted sympathy, but because she had nothing else. Every step she took echoed louder than it should have, like the room itself was judging her for daring to show up. And he noticed. Oh, he noticed. That was the part he enjoyed most. When she sat down, he leaned toward his legal team and whispered something that made them smirk. One of them glanced back at her, slow, deliberate, the way people look at something they believe is already defeated. Then he stood, not to testify, not yet, just to perform. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "this trial is a waste of time. My wife has no assets, no influence, no leverage. She's here because she thinks marriage gave her power." He paused, and then delivered the line that cut the room in half. "She was nothing before me, and she'll be nothing after." A few quiet laughs slipped out, not loud enough to object to. just loud enough to sting. She didn't cry. She didn't react. She stared straight ahead, because she'd learned long ago that reacting only made him crueler. But what no one in that courtroom realized was that this wasn't arrogance. This was strategy. He wanted her small. He wanted her silent. He wanted the world to believe she had nothing worth defending. Because the more powerless she looked, the safer he felt. And that feeling, that false sense of control, it was exactly what would make him careless. And in the shadows of that courtroom, where no one was paying attention yet, something was already shifting. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to ensure one thing. When this trial ended, only one of them would walk out untouched. David didn't confront her. Not yet. That night he didn't sleep. He sat in his car outside the house long after midnight, replaying everything in his head. Not what he felt, but what he had seen. And something ugly started to form. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was routine. The next morning, David arrived at his office earlier than usual. Not to work, but to review something he'd never bothered with before. Security logs. At first it looked harmless. Timestamps, door entries, room access. Then he noticed a pattern. Every time David traveled, every time he stayed late at the firm, every time he missed dinner, the same thing happened. Isabella stayed home, and every single one of those nights, his adoptive father's room door logged manual lock overrides. Not random, intentional. David's jaw tightened. He pulled archived footage from interior cameras, ones he had installed years ago for insurance reasons and forgot existed. He watched silently. There she was, standing in the doorway, blocking exits, lowering her voice, not yelling. Worse. Calm, controlled, cruel. She spoke to the old man like he was an object, like something she tolerated. Until she didn't. David watched his father flinch, not from violence, but from anticipation. That reaction hit harder than any slap ever could. This wasn't new. This had been happening for years. David fast-forwarded. Different days. Same tone. Same posture. Same smile. And the words, "Don't forget who pays for your comfort. You're lucky I even let you stay. One call and you're gone." David paused the video. His hands were shaking, but not with anger. With clarity. This wasn't just abuse. This was ownership. And the worst part? Isabella was careful. She never crossed a line that could be used against her easily. No bruises. No screaming. No witnesses. Just psychological pressure. Applied slowly, methodically, until resistance died on its own. David leaned back in his chair. He finally understood why his father never complained. Why he avoided eye contact. Why he always thanked Isabella, even when she humiliated him. This wasn't fear. This was conditioning. And Isabella had perfected it. David closed the footage and stared at the black screen. For the first time since marrying her, he didn't see Isabella as his wife. He saw her as a predator. And predators don't stop. They escalate. By the fourth court date, something feels off. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just wrong. David no longer reacts. No outbursts. No clenched fists. No sharp looks when Isabella smirks across the aisle. That silence? It scares people more than anger ever could. Because while Isabella thinks she's winning, David has stopped defending himself and started watching everything. Every word she says to her lawyers. Every fake tear she wipes away for the judge. Every lie she repeats with confidence, assuming no one will challenge it. She doesn't notice the shift. She's too busy enjoying the power. She laughs quietly when David's attorney speaks. Rolls her eyes when financial records are mentioned. Acts bored when the judge asks about asset division. Because she believes one thing with absolute certainty. David is cornered. David is isolated. David is weak. What she doesn't know is this. David requested something weeks ago, and it was approved without her ever being notified. A legal restructuring, a silent audit, and a temporary freeze placed under a neutral name she doesn't recognize. Nothing obvious disappears. Her cards still swipe. Her accounts still show numbers. Her lawyers still speak confidently. That's why she feels safe. But behind the scenes, control is already slipping through her fingers, thread by thread. Meanwhile, David visits someone he hasn't seen in years. Not a lawyer, not a friend. A former executive, one Isabella personally humiliated and pushed out. Someone who knows exactly how she operates. And when David asks just one question, how long has she been doing this? The answer hits harder than any insult in court. Because this wasn't a marriage gone bad. This was a pattern, a system. And Isabella has no idea that the evidence against her is no longer being collected for defense. It's being collected for destruction. And the trap? It's already set. Isabella didn't realize it yet. But this was the moment the ground cracked beneath her feet. Up until now, she had been careful, calculated, sharp, always watching who was in the room. But power has a way of making people sloppy, and Isabella believed she was untouchable. That afternoon, she sat comfortably in a private lounge near the courthouse, sipping her drink like the trial was already over. She laughed louder than necessary. Her posture said victory before a single verdict had been spoken. She started talking. At first, it sounded harmless. Complaints about how pathetic the process was, how the court system was too slow for people like her. Then her tone shifted. She mocked the legal team opposing her. She ridiculed the idea that anyone believed the wife had ever been equal to her. She bragged, casually, about how long she'd been controlling things behind the scenes. That's when she made the mistake. She started naming details, dates, private conversations, moves that were never supposed to be public. She spoke as if the room belonged to her. What she didn't know was that this space wasn't as private as she thought. Not anymore. Across the room, someone wasn't reacting, not flinching, not interrupting, just listening. Every word Isabella dropped wasn't floating away. It was landing somewhere permanent. She leaned back, smiling, and delivered the sentence that changed everything. A sentence that proved intent. A sentence that revealed control. A sentence that confirmed this wasn't misunderstanding or emotion. It was strategy. And once those words were spoken, there was no pulling them back. No apology could erase them. No lawyer could twist them. No excuse could soften them. Because from this moment forward, Isabella wasn't just arrogant. She was recorded, legally, quietly, irreversibly. And while she thought she was celebrating early, the trap had just clicked shut. Isabella still walked into every room like she owned it. Head high, voice sharp. That same cold smile she used whenever she wanted people to feel small. To the outside world, nothing had changed. She was still the wife, still giving orders, still signing papers without reading the fine print. What she didn't realize was that power doesn't disappear loudly. It vanishes quietly. Behind the scenes, doors were closing one by one. An account that used to clear instantly now sat under review. A legal request that once got approved in hours suddenly needed additional verification. A call she expected returned immediately, went unanswered for days. At first, Isabella brushed it off. She told herself it was just delays, bureaucracy, people being inefficient. She laughed it off the same way she always did, like the system owed her patience. But the pattern kept growing. Her assistant couldn't access certain files anymore. Her lawyer started saying, "I'll need to get back to you," instead of "I'll handle it." Meetings she demanded suddenly had to be scheduled. That had never happened before. And still, she didn't see it. Because arrogance blinds people faster than ignorance ever could. What Isabella didn't know was this. Every signature she'd relied on had been quietly rerouted. Every permission she assumed she still had already been revoked. Not publicly, not dramatically. Just enough that when she finally reached for real power, there would be nothing left to grab. And the most dangerous part? She still thought she was winning. She still believed she had time. She still believed no one would dare move against her. While the trap finished closing, and the ground beneath her confidence was already gone, Isabella walked into court that morning with her head high. Too high. She smiled at the cameras, adjusted her coat, whispered something smug to her attorney. To anyone watching, she looked untouched, confident, untouchable, still in charge. And that was the most dangerous part. Because Isabella didn't realize something had changed. Not in the courtroom, not on the record, but around her. The people who used to rush toward her now kept distance. Assistants who once laughed at her jokes suddenly avoided eye contact. Even her lawyer had stopped reassuring her, now responding with clipped, careful words. Isabella noticed, but dismissed it. In her mind, this was just pressure, just noise, just people being dramatic. What she didn't know was that the ground under her power was quietly dissolving. Emails stopped reaching her. Calls she expected never came back. Decisions she assumed were already approved weren't moving at all. Still, she felt safe. Why? Because she believed one thing with absolute certainty. She thought she still controlled the narrative. She believed David was weak, that the court saw her as polished, composed, respectable, and him as emotional, unstable, desperate. She didn't realize that behind closed doors, documents were being reviewed line by line. Timelines were being reconstructed. Patterns were becoming impossible to ignore. And worst of all for Isabella, she didn't realize that the things she once used as leverage were now being studied as evidence. Every cruel remark, every order she gave without witnesses, every private decision she assumed would stay buried. She thought the storm had passed. But this wasn't calm. This was the moment right before impact. And while Isabella still felt powerful, the system she trusted was quietly turning its face away from her. Isabella didn't realize the moment her power broke, because it didn't shatter loudly. It slipped. It started small, almost invisible, At a charity luncheon she'd attended 100 times before, Isabella walked in expecting the same routine. Whispered respect, forced smiles, people clearing space around her like she owned the room. Instead, conversations paused. Not to greet her, but to end. People glanced up, saw her, then looked away. Phones suddenly became interesting. Glasses were refilled that didn't need refilling. One woman she'd publicly humiliated years ago met her eyes, and didn't flinch this time. Isabella felt it, that tight pressure in her chest she'd never known before. She laughed it off, too loudly, too fast. Then came the seating chart. Her name wasn't at the front table. It wasn't even near it. She was placed along the side, halfway back, beside people who used to stand when she entered a room. Isabella marched to the coordinator, voice sharp, smile forced. There must be a mistake. The coordinator didn't apologize, didn't explain. She simply said, "No, ma'am, this is correct." That was when Isabella's confidence cracked. Not internally, but publicly. Her hand trembled as she picked up her glass. Her voice wavered when she tried to assert herself again. And then the first consequence landed. A board member she relied on, a man who once jumped at her calls, stood up to make an announcement. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was procedural, effective immediately. Isabella was being temporarily removed from advisory influence pending review. No accusations. No defense offered. Just removal. The room didn't erupt. No one gasped. They nodded. That silence was louder than any confrontation. Isabella sat frozen, realizing something terrifying. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was execution. Done quietly, cleanly, and in front of everyone. And somewhere across the room David watched, not with anger, but with certainty. Because the trap had closed, and Isabella had finally felt it. Isabella walks into court that morning wearing confidence like armor. Perfect hair, controlled smile, chin high. But something is different. People don't look at her the same way anymore. The whispers stop when she passes, not out of respect, but discomfort. Phones stay lowered, conversations end mid-sentence. She feels it, that shift in the air when power quietly leaves a room. Inside the courtroom, she tries to regain control. She interrupts her own lawyer, corrects the judge, laughs once, sharp, nervous. When a document is mentioned she claims is irrelevant. That's when it happens. A single file is entered into evidence. Not dramatic, not announced loudly, just accepted. Her lawyer freezes. Isabella turns to him, whispering fast, angry, asking what it is. He doesn't answer, because he already knows. The judge starts reading. Slowly, methodically. Every sentence strips something away. Authority, credibility, the narrative Isabella spent years building. Her face tightens. The smile cracks. This isn't about embarrassment anymore. This is about exposure. The court isn't reacting emotionally. And that terrifies her more than outrage ever could. Because calm judgment means the decision was already made. Across the room, David doesn't move, doesn't speak, doesn't celebrate. He just watches. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with certainty. Isabella finally understands something, far too late. This wasn't a fight she was losing today. This was a fall that started long before she noticed the ground giving way. And the worst part? The final consequence hasn't even been spoken yet. The courtroom was silent in a way that felt unnatural. The kind of silence that only comes right before everything collapses. Isabella sat upright, chin lifted, still clinging to the belief that she could talk her way out of this. She had done it her whole life. Manipulate, minimize, rewrite the truth until it favored her. But this time, the room wasn't listening to her anymore. David didn't stand up in anger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at her at first. He simply handed one final document to his attorney. And that was the moment the judge's expression changed. What followed wasn't dramatic yelling. It was worse. It was facts. Quiet, precise, undeniable. Financial records showing years of hidden transfers. Legal filings proving abuse of power. Testimony confirming long-term manipulation. Not just emotional, but legal and financial. Every move Isabella thought made her powerful had actually been recording her downfall. Her lawyer whispered urgently. She stopped smiling. Her fingers clenched. For the first time, Isabella realized something terrifying. She wasn't losing a case. She was losing everything she used to control. The judge spoke calmly, but each word landed like a hammer. Assets frozen. Custody decisions reversed. Credibility destroyed. And then came the final blow. Not from the court, but from the room itself. People she once intimidated wouldn't meet her eyes anymore. Former allies shifted away from her bench. Whispers replaced respect. David finally looked at her. Not with anger, not with revenge-fueled rage, but with something far colder. Closure, because the truth was simple. Isabella didn't fall because David attacked her. She fell because she underestimated how long he was willing to wait. She walked into court thinking she was untouchable. She walked out knowing her power was gone, her reputation shattered, and her story no longer belonged to her. And as she stood there, surrounded by consequences instead of control, one thing was clear to everyone watching. She wasn't defeated loudly. She was ended completely. And this time, there was no one left to save her.